Investigators still don't know what happened during the final minutes of the goal flight. Soldiers have been scouring the Amazon jungle with metal detectors looking for the plane's missing memory module. Almost a month after the crash, they find it. Colonel Ferreira hopes to hear some reason why the Gold crew wasn't able to avoid colliding with an oncoming jet.
Gold 1907, contact Brasilia, ACC on 125.2. A good flight.
Thanks very much, Brasilia 12.2. Gold 1907.
There are no alarms before the collision. No warning that they were flying straight for another jet. Earlier in the investigation, strange radar images suggested that the Legacy pilots were flying wildly over the Amazon. Now those suspicions have vanished, but Ferreira revisits the fluctuating radar data to understand why neither plane knew the other was coming.
You see, the altitude is very significant.
To try to understand this last piece of the puzzle, Colonel Ferreira returns to the radar display that air traffic controllers saw the day of the crash. Instead of displaying just the expected altitude and the actual altitude, the letter Z appears between them.
The Z on the air traffic controller screens indicates that the airplane he's looking at has lost its transponder.
Modern commercial aircraft are equipped with transponders. Like small radio stations, they broadcast information on the plane's altitude and flight number. This information is received by computers on the ground and instantly displayed on the screens of air traffic controllers. In Brasilia, if the transponder fails, so-called primary radar takes over automatically. Signals are sent out from the ground that hit the target and return. Those readings are wildly inaccurate. The inaccuracy of the radar tracking the Legacy jet explains why its altitude appeared to be rising and falling. Investigators discover that the transponder wasn't sending out signals for more than 50 minutes before the crash. But controllers didn't notify the pilots. That may be because they didn't notice the subtle change.
A forma como é apresentado para o controlador não é...
The way in which the information is displayed to the controller does not visually alert him to the change. There are no flashing lights that would tell the controller that the plane has lost its transponder.
Chamasse realmente a atenção do controlador para que, aquele momento, aquela aeronave perdeu.
There's an even more critical role played by the transponder. It doesn't just beam information to controllers on the ground, but to other planes as well. All commercial aircraft are equipped with a warning system called TCAS, the Traffic Collision Avoidance System.
TCAS gives a relative position of other airplanes within range of your own airplane.
TCAS picks up a signal from an oncoming plane's transponder and issues a warning if it's too close. If either plane's transponder is off, the system won't work.
What the hell is that?
Ferreira discovers that the Legacy's transponder was working early in the flight and after the collision. But for more than 50 critical minutes, it was silent. How had a state-of-the-art jet, just off the factory floor, developed problems with its transponder?
Parada de funcionamento de transmissão do transponder.
The failure of the transponder certainly contributed to this accident.
Para a ocorrência do acidente. E nós tínhamos...
And we had to find out what caused it to fail.
O que causou essa interrupção no funcionamento?
Investigators examine the Legacy jet's transponder unit. They discover that the system which controls it had a troubled history. It had been installed on a different plane, but removed because it wasn't working. It was repaired and then placed on the jet that was sold to XLR. Investigators have the system tested. But even with its suspicious past, after the crash they can find no obvious problems with the plane's transponder.
Now this is the layout now on the side of the one in the legacy jet.
Colonel Ferreira does notice something potentially dangerous about the design of the Legacy's cockpit. If a pilot uses the built-in footrest during flight, his toes can come in contact with the buttons on the transponder.
Show me what it looks like in standby mode.
And when the transponder does go into standby, it would be difficult for a pilot to notice.
There's no alarm?
A small yellow warning light is the only indication that the transponder isn't on.
It was not easy for the pilots to detect that because it's not hooked up with the central warning and alert system.
But the pilots of the Legacy jet do not remember using the plane's footrest.
Still working out the kinks on how to work this flight management system. Time.
Investigators suspect that one of the pilots may have turned the transponder off by mistake.
No momento, o cenário, mas o cenário provável.
The most probable scenario is that by accident, one of the pilots temporarily turned off the equipment as he tried to familiarize himself with the technology on board.
Com os equipamentos de bordo.
However, the transponder went off. At a critical moment, the crew had no last-ditch safety system to warn them that they were flying right at a 737. Even the TCAS system on the GOL plane was working. There was no signal from the approaching jet to receive. Closing in on each other at 1,600 kilometers an hour, the pilots never saw each other coming. Brazil's air traffic control system would undergo some radical changes as a result of the collision. But those changes would not come without a fight. The investigation into the crash of GOL Flight 1907 has uncovered dangerous problems with Brazil's air control system.
Brasilia, November 600 X-ray, Lima, Lima 370, good afternoon.
Two planes were assigned to fly at the same altitude in the same airspace.
Radar surveillance.
Overworked and inexperienced controllers in Brasilia neglected to instruct the Legacy jet to descend to 36,000 feet.
You have 5 aircraft. The Legacy is at 360.
Then they mistook the Legacy's planned altitude for its actual altitude. To make matters worse, the Legacy pilots, unfamiliar with Brazilian airspace, were unable to make contact with controllers on the ground. And somehow the transponder, which broadcasts their location in the sky, went silent, which controllers in Brasilia failed to notice.
What you will see Wednesday night in this